They called him the Death King. 3 mates in 10 years. 3 women who had stood beside him, worn his ring, shared his bed. 3 women who had withered and died within weeks of the bonding, their life drained away like water through sand. No one knew why. Some said he was cursed. Others whispered he was the curse itself, a shadow given flesh, beautiful and terrible and utterly lethal to anyone who dared to love him. So when the Alpha King of Valdrin announced he would take a 4th mate, no woman stepped forward. Not the ambitious daughters of noble houses, not the desperate widows seeking status, not even the she-wolves who had once composed poetry about his frost-colored eyes and sharp jaw. The great hall fell silent. The king waited. And then she moved. A quiet omega from a forgotten pack. Small. Unremarkable. The kind of woman people looked through rather than at. She had no beauty to speak of, no dowry, and no name worth remembering. She was nothing. Yet she walked toward the Death King while every other woman fled. "You understand what you're doing?" His voice was ice itself. "Every woman who is bonded to me has died." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Then why?" She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze when no one else would. "Because some fates are worse than death." He should have refused her, should have sent her away for her own protection. Instead, he made her a vow. He would marry her, crown her, and give her everything a queen could want, but he would never touch her, never be alone with her, never let her close enough for the shadow inside him to reach her. Neither of them understood how impossible that vow would be. The great hall of Valdrin had been built for war. Stone pillars thick as ancient oaks supported a ceiling lost in shadow. Banners bearing the kingdom's sigil, a wolf's head wreathed in thorns, hung motionless in the still air. The windows were narrow, arrow slits that let in more darkness than light. It was not a place designed for ceremony. Yet here they were. Senna stood at the back of the gathered women, precisely where Alpha Orvin had ordered her to stand. "Do not speak. Do not move. Do not draw attention." His command still echoed in her skull like stones rattling in an empty jar. "You are here only because I was required to bring unmated females, nothing more." She believed him. Why wouldn't she? 23 years of being told she was worthless had a way of settling into your bones. The women ahead of her were dressed in silks and velvets, their hair elaborately arranged, their skin perfumed with oils that made Senna's nose itch. They were the daughters of powerful alphas, raised for exactly this purpose: to be chosen, to be wanted, to matter. Senna wore a plain gray dress that had been washed so many times it was nearly colorless. Her dark hair hung loose and unstyled. She had not been given perfume or jewelry or even a proper meal before the journey. She was a placeholder, a number to fill a quota, and she was grateful for it. Being invisible meant being safe. Being overlooked meant surviving another day. These were the lessons Senna had learned well. "He's coming," someone whispered, and a ripple of fear passed through the assembled women. Senna felt it too. A pressure in the air, a weight that seemed to press against her chest. The torches along the walls flickered, their flames bending toward the great doors as if pulled by an invisible hand. Then the doors opened, and the Alpha King of Valdrin walked in. Senna had heard the stories. Everyone had. King Severin, the Death King, the Shadow Wolf. They said he was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp edges and cold steel and the promise of pain. They said his eyes were the color of a frozen sky just before a storm. They said that to look at him directly was to invite death. The stories, Senna realized, had not been exaggerated. He was tall, taller than any wolf she had ever seen, with hair the color of midnight that fell to his shoulders in waves. His face was all severe angles, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, a jaw that could have been carved from marble. And his eyes were exactly as the stories claimed. Pale gray, almost colorless, like frost on glass. But it wasn't his beauty that made the women shrink back. It was the cold. An unnatural chill radiated from him, dropping the temperature in the hall with every step he took. Senna watched the nearest torches sputter and dim as he passed them, watched her own breath mist in the suddenly frigid air. The women in front of her were trembling, and not from the cold alone. "You may begin," the king said to the master of ceremonies. His voice was deep and controlled, carrying easily through the silent hall. The master of ceremonies, a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, as per the council's requirements, you must select a mate from among the eligible females presented today. Each alpha has brought their unmated women of breeding age. Shall I introduce them?" "That won't be necessary." Severin's gaze swept over the assembled women like a bitter wind. "I will ask a simpler question. Which of you is willing to be my queen?" Silence. The noble women, so confident moments ago, suddenly found the stone floor fascinating. The ambitious daughters gripped each other's hands, backing away rather than forward. One woman near the front began to weep silently. Severin waited, his expression betraying nothing. "Come now," the master of ceremonies said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is a tremendous honor. Queen of Valdren, mate to the most powerful alpha in the realm." "An honor that has killed 3 women already," someone muttered, too loudly. The temperature dropped further. Senna could see ice crystals forming on the nearest banner. "Perhaps," Severin said quietly, "we should end this farce. I will not force any woman to— I'll do it." The words left Senna's mouth before she realized she was speaking. Before she understood that her feet were carrying her forward, past the trembling noblewomen, past the weeping daughters, toward the king whose shadow seemed to devour the light itself. Every eye in the hall turned to her. Senna kept walking. She heard Orvin's sharp intake of breath somewhere behind her, heard him hiss her name like a curse. But for the first time in her life, she did not stop when he commanded it. She stopped only when she stood before the king. Up close, the cold was almost unbearable. Her thin dress offered no protection against it. Her teeth wanted to chatter, her body wanted to flee. But she forced herself to meet those storm-gray eyes, forced herself to hold his gaze when every instinct screamed at her to look away. And strangely, despite the cold that surrounded him, she felt something else. A flicker of warmth in her own chest, as if something deep inside her was responding to his presence. She dismissed it as nerves. Severin stared at her for a long moment. Then quietly, dangerously. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Do you know what I've done? What happens to the women who bond with me?" "Yes." "Then why?" The question held no curiosity, only cold confusion. "Why would you choose death?" Senna thought of Greymore, of Orvin's hands, of the small locked room where she had spent so many nights, of the silence that had been forced upon her for so long that she had almost forgotten she had a voice at all. "Because some fates," she said, "are worse than death." Something shifted in the king's pale eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. And then the hall erupted into chaos. The private study was warmer than the great hall, though not by much. A fire burned in the hearth, but the flames seemed reluctant, huddling close to the logs as if afraid to venture further into the room. Senna stood near the doorway where a guard had deposited her, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their trembling. King Severin stood by the window, his back to her. Minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. Senna used the silence to study the room. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with leather-bound volumes and scrolled documents. Maps covered the desk, weighed down by carved stone figures that might have been chess pieces or military markers. Everything was precisely arranged, almost obsessively orderly. The room of a man who controlled what he could, because he could not control what mattered most. "You're from Greymore." The king's voice broke the silence without warning. "Alpha Orvin's pack." "Yes, Your Majesty." "He seemed displeased when you stepped forward." Senna said nothing. What could she say? That displeased was a gentle word for the murder she had seen in Orvan's eyes? Severin turned from the window. In the firelight, his features were sharper, more severe. The shadows in the room seemed to lean toward him, drawn like moths to a dark flame. "Tell me," he said, "what is wrong with you?" The question should have stung. Instead, Senna almost laughed. "Your Majesty will have to be more specific. According to Alpha Orvan, the list is extensive." The faintest flicker of amusement crossed the king's face before vanishing. "I mean, why no one has mated you. You are of breeding age. You appear healthy. Yet you were hidden at the back of the hall like an embarrassment." "I am an Omega," Senna said simply, "the weakest of my pack. I have no useful skills, no family connections, and no beauty to recommend me. I am, as you observed, an embarrassment. And yet, you were the only one brave enough to step forward." Senna shook her head. "Not brave, Your Majesty. Desperate." Severin was quiet for a moment. Then he moved, not toward her, but to the desk, placing it between them like a barrier. The cold intensified as he passed, and Senna saw frost forming on the window where he had stood. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "that I have never told anyone, and then you are going to walk out of this castle and return to your pack." "Your Majesty." "Be silent." The command carried the weight of an alpha's authority, and Senna's voice died in her throat. "You will hear this. Then you will leave." He leaned forward, his pale eyes holding hers. "There is something inside me," he said quietly. "A darkness I was born with. A shadow that lives in my blood. It hungers, this shadow. And what it hungers for is life. The life of whoever bonds themselves to me." Senna's breath caught. "My first mate lasted 3 weeks," Severin continued, his voice flat, reciting facts rather than feeling them. "The healers said it was a wasting sickness, but I knew. I could feel the shadow feeding through our bond. My second mate lasted 12 days. My third did not survive the first night." His hands gripped the edge of the desk, and Senna saw ice spreading from his fingers across the wood. "I am not being poetic when I call myself the Death King. I am being literal. To bond with me is to die." He looked at her. "Do you understand now?" Senna understood. She understood that he was not a monster who killed for pleasure, but something perhaps more tragic. A man cursed to destroy what he touched. "I understand," she said. "But I still wish to stay." Severin stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "You wish to die?" "No." Senna took a breath. "I wish to escape. Whatever fate awaits me here, Your Majesty, it will be kinder than what waits for me in Greymoor. You cannot know that. I can." She held his gaze. "You've just told me you want to protect me. You've warned me, given me a choice, and tried to send me away for my own safety." Her voice wavered slightly. "No one in Greymoor has ever done that." The king was silent for a long moment. "If you stay," he said finally, "I will not touch you. Not once. We will not share chambers. We will rarely share the same room. I will keep my distance always, because distance is the only thing that weakens the shadow's pull." "I accept." "We will not be husband and wife in any true sense. You will have the title, the crown, the privileges, but you will have a stranger for a mate." "I accept." "And I will never—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I will never allow myself to feel anything for you, because feeling is what feeds it. Caring is what kills." Senna nodded. "I accept your terms, Your Majesty." Severin looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he straightened. "You're either very brave," he said quietly, "or very foolish. Perhaps both." He turned back to the window. "The wedding will be in 2 days. You will be given chambers far from mine. Servants will attend you. You will want for nothing, except a true mate. Thank you, Your Majesty." "Don't thank me." His voice was heavy. "I may have just signed your death warrant." As the guard escorted her from the study, Senna glanced back. The king stood silhouetted against the frost-covered window, a dark figure in a frozen room. He looked, she thought, impossibly lonely. The council chamber was vast and circular, with a domed ceiling painted to depict wolves hunting beneath a star-scattered sky. A long curved table dominated the center, and around it sat the 7 members of the Royal Council, all alphas, all male, all watching Senna as if she were a curiosity they couldn't quite categorize. King Severin sat at the head of the table. The chair beside him, the Queen's chair, remained empty. Senna had been directed to stand before the table like a petitioner. She kept her hands folded, her eyes lowered, and her posture as small and unthreatening as Orvin had trained her to be. But inside, her heart raced, because Orvin was here. He stood against the wall with the other visiting alphas who had brought women to the ceremony. His eyes had not left Senna since she entered. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight, like hands around her throat. "The contract has been prepared according to your specifications, Your Majesty," the eldest counselor said. He was a gray-haired wolf with a face like crumpled parchment. "Though I must admit, the terms are unusual." "Read them," Severin commanded. The counselor cleared his throat. "First, the Queen shall have her own wing of the castle, separate from the king's chambers. She shall not enter the king's private quarters without explicit invitation." Senna nodded. Expected. "Second, the king and queen shall not share meals, meetings, or public appearances more than 4 times per year. Contact shall be limited to matters of state." A murmur rippled through the council. Even among arranged marriages, this level of separation was extreme. Third, the physical requirements of the bond shall be fulfilled only when necessary to produce an heir, and only under controlled conditions as determined by the king. Senna felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. Fourth, should the queen show signs of the wasting illness that claimed the previous queens, she shall be immediately removed from the castle and isolated for her own protection. "In other words," one of the younger counselors muttered, "sent away to die alone." Severin's gaze snapped to him. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Would you prefer she die in the castle, Lord Marchand, within reach of the shadow? I have buried 3 wives. I will not bury a 4th if there is any chance of saving her." Lord Marchand paled and said nothing more. "Is this agreeable to you?" Severin asked, turning to Senna. Before she could answer, Orvin stepped forward. "Your Majesty, if I may." The council turned. Severin's expression remained unchanged, but Senna saw the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Alpha Orvin, you have something to add?" "Only my concern for the girl, Majesty." Orvin's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice he used when outsiders were watching. "Senna is troubled. She has been since childhood. Strange behaviors, disobedience, a tendency toward hysteria. I fear she is not suitable to be queen." Senna's nails bit into her palms. "Furthermore," Orvin continued, "she stepped forward without my permission. Under pack law, an Omega cannot enter a mating contract without her alpha's consent. I would be within my rights to reclaim her." "Reclaim?" Severin repeated the word as if tasting something foul. "She is not property, Alpha Orvin." "With respect, Your Majesty, pack law says otherwise. Unmated Omegas belong to... Pack law does not supersede the king's law." Severin's voice cut through Orvin's like a blade through silk. "And the king's law says that any woman who voluntarily offers herself as a mate to the crown becomes a ward of the crown from that moment forward." Orvin's smooth mask flickered. "Your Majesty, I must protest. This girl is unstable. She is not fit." "I wasn't speaking to you." Severin turned to Senna. His pale eyes found hers, and for a moment, she forgot the cold, forgot the fear. "I was speaking to my future queen." "My future queen." The words hung in the air. The council members exchanged glances. Orvin went very still. Is this agreeable to you? Severin asked again. Senna looked at the contract, at the pages of limitations and restrictions and carefully measured distance. Any other woman would have been insulted. Any other woman would have demanded more. But Senna saw what the council did not. She saw a man trying desperately to protect her. She saw terms designed not to imprison her, but to keep her alive. She saw kindness disguised as coldness, care hidden beneath control. Yes, Your Majesty, she said clearly. The terms are agreeable. They are more than generous. Severin blinked. For just an instant, that cold mask slipped, and she glimpsed something beneath. Confusion, perhaps. Or wonder. Generous? One of the counselors echoed. To be kept at arm's length from your own husband? Senna turned to face the table. I have spent my life being kept close by those who meant me harm. Distance offered with respect is far preferable to closeness offered with cruelty. Silence fell. Orvin's expression twisted, a flash of rage breaking through his smooth facade before he controlled it. But Senna had seen. And more importantly, Severin had seen. The contract will be signed, the king said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Alpha Orvin, you are dismissed from court. Your role in this matter is concluded. You will leave Valdren by sunset. Your Majesty. That was not a request. The words carried the full weight of an Alpha King's command. Orvin staggered slightly, physically forced to submit. His eyes found Senna's, and the promise in them made her blood run cold. This isn't over, that look said. You will pay for this. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber, his spine rigid with barely contained fury. Senna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Sign here, Severin said, sliding the contract across the table. She moved forward, took the offered quill, and wrote her name in careful letters. Her hand was steady. Her heart was not. When she finished, Severin signed beside her, a bold, angular signature that seemed to absorb the ink. It's done, the eldest counselor announced. By the laws of Valdren, you are now formally betrothed. The wedding shall take place in 2 days' time. The council members began gathering their papers, murmuring amongst themselves. But Severin remained seated, his eyes fixed on the contract. You called this generous, he said quietly, so only she could hear. You meant it. Yes. Why? He looked up at her, and for the first time, Senna saw something vulnerable in those storm-gray eyes. What did they do to you in Greymore that makes a loveless marriage seem like mercy? Senna thought of the small locked room, the silence, the hands that left bruises in places no one would see. The years of being told she was worthless, broken, and wrong. Perhaps someday I'll tell you, Your Majesty, she said softly. When we know each other better. We won't know each other better. That's rather the point of the contract. Senna allowed herself the smallest smile. We shall see. She turned and walked toward the door, escorted by the guards who would take her to her new chambers. Her own chambers, in her own wing, far from Orvin's reach. Behind her she heard Severin's voice, so quiet she almost missed it. What have I gotten myself into? The Cathedral of Valdren had stood for 600 years. Its spires pierced the gray sky like accusations, and its stained glass windows depicted not saints or gods, but wolves. Wolves hunting, wolves howling, wolves standing victorious over fallen enemies. This was not a place of gentle worship. It was a monument to power. And today, it was filled to bursting. Senna stood in the antechamber, listening to the roar of voices beyond the great doors. Every noble family in the kingdom had come, every alpha who had ever sworn fealty to the crown. Every curious commoner who could squeeze into the public galleries. They had not come to celebrate. They had come to see the woman foolish enough to marry death. You look pale, said Mira, the elderly Omega who had been assigned as Senna's attendant. Her hands were gentle as she adjusted the silver circlet on Senna's head. Are you frightened? No, Senna lied. Mira smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. Good, because they can smell fear, you know. All those nobles out there, waiting for you to crumble. Then I won't crumble. That's the spirit. Mira stepped back to survey her work. You look like a queen. Whatever else happens today, remember that. Senna turned to the mirror. The gown they had given her was white silk, simple but exquisitely made. Her dark hair had been braided with silver thread that caught the candlelight. She looked, she thought distantly, like someone else entirely. Someone who belonged in cathedrals and castles. The illusion wouldn't last. It never did. It's time, a guard announced from the doorway. Senna took a breath. Then she walked toward the great doors, and they swung open before her. The noise hit her first. Hundreds of whispered conversations dying mid-word, replaced by a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Then came the eyes. Hundreds of them, tracking her every step as she walked down the endless aisle toward the altar. Toward him. Severin stood waiting, dressed in black that made his pale skin look almost luminous. The chill radiating from him reached her even from 20 feet away, making her breath mist in the air. Ice had formed on the altar beside him, creeping across the stone like crystalline vines. 3 wives, she reminded herself. 3 women who walked this same aisle. 3 women who never walked out again. She kept walking. When she reached the altar, Severin's gaze found hers. In the light streaming through the stained glass, they looked almost colorless, frost-given form. You came, he said quietly, so only she could hear. Did you expect me to run? I hoped you would. The priest cleared his throat nervously. He was a small man, dwarfed by the 2 wolves before him, and his hands trembled as he opened the ceremonial book. Beloved wolves of Valdren, he began, his voice echoing through the cathedral. We gather today to witness the binding of our king to his chosen mate. The words washed over Senna like distant thunder. She was aware of them, but they seemed unimportant compared to the weight of Severin's gaze, the cold that surrounded him, the shadow she could almost see flickering at the edges of his form. And so I ask, King Severin of Valdren, do you take this woman as your mate, your queen, your bond? I do. His voice carried no emotion, no warmth, but his eyes never left hers. And do you, Senna of Greymoor, take this man as your mate, your king, your bond? This is your last chance, a voice whispered in her mind. Turn back. Run. Live. I do. A collective intake of breath from the crowd. They had expected her to refuse at the last moment. They had wanted her to. Then by the ancient laws of blood and bond, the priest said, I now require the physical claiming, the exchange of bites that will seal your wolves together for— No. The single word from Severin stopped the priest mid-sentence. Murmurs erupted through the cathedral. The claiming bite was sacred, essential. Without it, the bond was incomplete, the marriage merely political. Your Majesty, the priest stammered, the ritual requires— I know what the ritual requires. Severin's voice was ice. And I am telling you it will not happen. Not today. Not until I am certain it is safe. But Your Majesty, an unclaimed queen is my wife regardless. Severin turned to face the crowd, and the temperature in the cathedral dropped so sharply that frost began creeping across the nearest pews. Let me be clear. This woman is your queen. She will be treated as such. Any who question her legitimacy question me. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Severin turned back to Senna. His expression remained cold, but something in his eyes told a different story. I will not risk you, he said quietly. Not for tradition. Not for anything. The priest's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his book. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife, king and queen, bound by vow if not by bite. It was done. The crowd began to applaud, uncertain, scattered applause that felt more like obligation than celebration. Senna barely heard it. She was too focused on the man before her, This cold king who had just defied 600 years of tradition to protect her. "Your Majesty," she whispered. Severin offered his arm, but carefully, leaving inches between his sleeve and her hand. Even that minimal contact made the cold intensify, made her skin prickle with frost. "Come," he said. "Let us give them their show. And then you will be escorted to your chambers, far from mine. And you?" "I will do what I do every night." His jaw tightened. "I will stay away from you, and pray that the shadow does not reach you anyway." They walked down the aisle together, the cold king and his quiet queen. The crowd watched them pass, and Senna could hear the whispers already beginning. How long will this one last? A month? A week? Poor thing doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. But one whisper stood out from the rest, spoken by an elderly woman in noble dress. "Did you see the way he looked at her? The king has never looked at anyone like that." Senna held that thought close as the great doors closed behind them. The queen's chambers were larger than Senna had imagined. A sitting room led to a bedroom, which led to a private bathing chamber, which led to a small garden enclosed by high stone walls. Everything was appointed in soft blues and silvers, calming colors, soothing colors, the kind of colors chosen for someone expected to need soothing. The servants had left hours ago. The candles burned low. Outside her window, the moon hung fat and silver in a cloudless sky. And Senna could not sleep. She sat by the fire, wrapped in a woolen shawl, watching the flames dance. Her wedding night. In the stories, wedding nights were filled with passion and claiming and the forging of unbreakable bonds. In reality, she was alone. "This is what you wanted," she reminded herself. "Safety, distance, a husband who won't touch you." So why did she feel so empty? A knock at her door made her jump. "Enter," she called, expecting a servant. Instead, the door opened to reveal Severin. He stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. His hair was loose, falling around his shoulders in dark waves. He had changed from his wedding clothes into something simpler, a gray tunic, black trousers. He looked less like a king and more like a man. A man who had come to his wife's chambers on their wedding night. "Your Majesty," Senna said, rising quickly. "I didn't expect. I shouldn't be here." His voice was rough. "I know the terms. I wrote them, but I—" He stopped, jaw working. "I needed to see that you were well. I am well. You're sitting alone in the dark on your wedding night. The candles are not dark." "That's not what I meant." Senna studied him. He remained in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame as if physically preventing himself from entering. The cold emanating from him made the candle flames lean away, made her breath visible in soft white puffs. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. "I should not." "That wasn't my question." Severin closed his eyes. When he opened them again, vulnerability had replaced his careful composure. "Yes, I would like to come in. And that is precisely why I must not. Because of the shadow. Because of what I might do to you without meaning to." He released the doorframe, stepping back. "Every moment I spend near you, I can feel it stirring, hungry. It knows you're my wife now. It knows you're connected to me." "Then why did you come at all?" The question hung between them. "I don't know," Severin admitted. "I have asked myself that question for the past hour. I told myself I was checking on your welfare, ensuring the servants had attended you properly. But that's not—" He exhaled, a harsh sound. "That's not true." Senna took a step toward him. "Don't." The word came out strangled. "Please. The closer you get, the harder it is to control." She stopped. "What does it feel like?" "The shadow?" "Cold. Always cold." His hands clenched at his sides. "It lives where my heart should be, where the warmth should be. My parents thought I was simply a cold child, distant, difficult. They didn't understand that the cold was literal, that something had hollowed me out before I was even born." "How did your previous mates—" She couldn't finish the question. Die? Severin's laugh was bitter. The same way everything dies in harsh frost. They froze. Slowly at first. Cold hands, cold feet. A chill they couldn't shake. Then faster. Ice in their blood, frost in their lungs. By the end, they were statues. Beautiful, and cold, and lifeless. Senna's throat tightened. And you felt it happening? Every moment, through the bond. His voice cracked. I felt their life draining into me, felt the shadow feeding on them, and I couldn't stop it. I tried. Gods know I tried. I isolated myself, refused to touch them, barely spoke to them. But the bond itself was enough. Simply being connected to me killed them. Yet you married again? 3 times. The council demanded heirs. The kingdom needed stability. His jaw tightened, and I was foolish enough to hope that perhaps the next one would be different, that perhaps I could learn to control it. Can you? Control it? I don't know. He held her gaze across the threshold. But I intend to try. With you, I intend to try harder than I have ever tried before. Something warm bloomed in Senna's chest. Why? Because you stepped forward when no one else would. Because you called my cruelty kindness. Because you looked at me in that council chamber like I was a man worth trusting, when no one has looked at me that way in years. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve your trust. But I find myself desperately wanting to earn it. Senna moved before she could stop herself. Not toward him, but to the chair nearest the fire. She sat, arranging her shawl around her shoulders. You could stay, she said. There, in the doorway. We wouldn't touch. We wouldn't even be in the same room, technically. But you could stay. Severin stared at her. Just for a while, she continued. We could talk. I could tell you about Greymoor. You could tell me about Valdrin. We could be strangers becoming less strange to each other. That sounds dangerous. Perhaps. She smiled slightly. But I've decided I rather like danger. A long moment passed. Then, slowly, Severin lowered himself to sit on the floor of the hallway, his back against the doorframe. He remained outside her chambers, technically following the rules. But he was there, present, willing to stay. Tell me about Greymoor, he said. So she did. She told him about the small locked room, about Orvin's cruelty and the pack's indifference, about learning to make herself invisible, to be overlooked, to survive. She told him things she had never told anyone, because what did she have to lose? And he listened. When she finished, the candles had burned to stubs, and the first gray light of dawn was creeping through the windows. He hurt you, Severin said. His voice was soft, but something dangerous lurked beneath. This Alpha Orvin, he hurt you badly. Yes. I should have killed him when I had the chance. Perhaps. But then I would have wondered if you were a man who killed easily. She held his gaze across the threshold between them. Now I know you're a man who listens. I think I prefer that. Severin rose, bracing himself against the door frame. The cold around him had lessened somehow, though she could still see frost on the stone where he had sat. I should go, he said, before the servants arrive and find the king sleeping outside his queen's chambers like a lovesick fool. Are you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Lovesick, I mean? His expression shifted. Surprise, then something softer, then careful blankness. I cannot afford to be. That's rather the point. Of course. He turned to leave, then paused. Senna. Yes? Thank you. For talking to me. For not fearing me. I've known true monsters, Your Majesty. You are not one of them. He said nothing. But as he walked away down the cold corridor, she could have sworn she saw him smile. 5 weeks passed. 5 weeks in which Senna learned the rhythms of the castle, which servants could be trusted, which corridors led where, which gardens were peaceful, and which were frequented by gossiping nobles. She learned to navigate her new life like a ship learning to navigate unfamiliar waters. And every night, without fail, the king came to her door. He never entered at first. That was the rule. But he sat in the hallway, and she sat by the fire, and they talked until dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. She noticed strange things during those weeks. The flowers in her private garden bloomed more vigorously than anywhere else in the castle, even though it was late autumn. Servants commented that her wing always felt warmer, more welcoming. And once, when a kitchen maid burned her hand and Senna held it in comfort, the burn faded within hours instead of days. She dismissed these observations as coincidence. He told her about the burden of the crown, the endless negotiations, the petty squabbles between noble houses, the constant pressure to produce an heir when producing an heir might kill the woman carrying it. She told him about her mother, who had died suddenly and mysteriously when Senna was 7, a fever that came without warning and took her within a single night. About her father, who had been kind until grief transformed him into something unrecognizable. About being sold to Greymore when she was 14, traded for a border agreement that no one honored anyway. With each conversation, the distance between them seemed smaller. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. After the third week, Severin asked if he could sit just inside the threshold. Senna agreed. The physical claiming had never occurred, but she could feel something forming between them anyway, a connection that transcended the ritual, built on shared secrets and quiet understanding rather than bites and blood. After the 4th week, he moved to the settee near the fire while she sat across from him in her own chair. They never touched. That was still the rule. But the distance between them had shrunk to feet instead of rooms, and somehow, impossibly, Senna had never felt healthier. "Aldrich thinks I'm going mad," Severin said one evening, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "He's run out of explanations for why you're thriving instead of fading." "Perhaps I'm simply too stubborn to fade?" "That is one theory." His gaze held warmth despite the frost in his coloring. "I have another." "Oh?" "You're different. I don't know how or why, but something about you is different." Senna felt that strange warmth flicker in her chest again, the same sensation she had felt the first time she stood before him. She still didn't understand what it meant. "The council met today," Severin said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. "They're pressuring me again. About the heir." Senna looked up from her embroidery. "What did you tell them?" "That I would consider their concerns, which is diplomatic language for, go away and stop bothering me." He rubbed his temples. "They don't understand. They think I'm being stubborn, precious about tradition. They don't know about the shadow? No one knows except you." He looked at her through the firelight. "And my physician, who has been sworn to secrecy. The council thinks the previous queens died of a mysterious illness. They believe that with the right precautions, the right medicines, a 4th queen might survive. But you know better. I know that it doesn't matter how careful we are. The bond itself is deadly." His hands clenched. "Every moment I spend with you, every conversation, every smile, it strengthens the connection between us. And the stronger the connection, the easier it becomes for the shadow to reach you." Senna set down her embroidery. "Then why do you keep coming?" The question hung between them, heavy and unanswerable. "Because I can't stop," Severin admitted, his voice raw. "I tell myself every night that this will be the last time, that I'm endangering you by being here. And then the next night comes, and I find myself at your door again. Perhaps you shouldn't stop." He looked at her sharply. "Perhaps," Senna continued carefully, "the solution isn't to avoid the bond, but to understand it. Your shadow feeds on your mates through the connection, yes. But what if there's a way to change what it feeds on?" "I don't follow." Senna rose and moved closer to the settee, not touching him, but near enough that she could see the details of his face in the firelight. "You said your previous mates died because the shadow drained their life force, but all 3 of them were chosen by the council, weren't they? Political matches, women who feared you, who never truly knew you. What does that matter? Maybe everything. Her pulse quickened, but she pressed on. What if the shadow doesn't feed on the bond itself? What if it feeds on the emptiness within the bond? On the fear and distance and lack of true connection? Severin was very still. You're suggesting that love might… what? Starve the shadow? I'm suggesting that we don't know what might help because everyone has been too afraid to try anything except distance. She met his gaze steadily. What if I'm not afraid? Then you're foolish. Perhaps. But I'm also alive, aren't I? 5 weeks as your queen, and I haven't so much as caught a chill. She saw the moment her words landed, saw him process them, turn them over, examine them from every angle. It could be too early, he said slowly. The symptoms sometimes take weeks to manifest. Or it could be that something is different this time. She took a breath. I'm not asking you to abandon caution. I'm asking you to consider that your assumptions might be wrong. Severin stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he rose to his feet. Come with me, he said. Where? The physician's quarters. If we're going to test your theory, we should at least document it properly. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Consider it a scientific experiment. Senna grabbed her shawl and followed him into the corridor. For the first time, they walked side by side, still not touching, still maintaining distance but moving together rather than apart. Guards stared as they passed. Servants pressed themselves against walls, eyes wide. The queen was walking with the king. In all his previous marriages, that had never happened. The physician, an elderly beta named Aldrich, was not pleased to be woken in the middle of the night. But when Severin explained what they wanted, his irritation transformed into fascination. Take her vitals, Severin commanded. Compare them to the baseline from her arrival. Look for any signs of the wasting. Aldrich examined Senna thoroughly. Pulse, temperature, the color of her skin, the clarity of her eyes. He asked her questions about fatigue, appetite, and sleep quality. He had her perform small tasks to test her coordination and strength. When he finished, his expression was puzzled. Well, Severin demanded. She's perfectly healthy, Your Majesty. Aldrich consulted his notes. In fact, she appears to be healthier than when she arrived. Her pulse is stronger. Her color is better. Her weight has increased appropriately. That's impossible. The data suggests otherwise. Aldrich looked between them. Whatever is happening in this marriage, it isn't following the pattern of the previous 3. Senna felt hope bloom in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. It could still be too early to tell. It could, Aldrich agreed. But in my previous observations, the symptoms began appearing within the first week. The fact that we're 5 weeks in with no deterioration is significant. Severin was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Senna, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. You might be right, he said quietly. Something might be different this time. We won't know unless we continue the experiment, she replied. Unless we let the bond grow instead of fighting it. That's a considerable risk. I'm willing to take it. She held his gaze. Are you? The question stretched between them, loaded with meaning neither of them fully understood. Finally, Severin exhaled. Against my better judgment, he said. Yes, I believe I am. They walked back to her chambers together, the space between them somehow smaller than before. When they reached her door, Severin hesitated. Tomorrow night, he said. Instead of the hallway? May I come inside? Just to the threshold. Just a few feet closer. Senna smiled. Yes, Your Majesty. You may. He nodded once, sharply, as if afraid to say anything more. Then he turned and strode away, his dark hair catching the torchlight. Senna watched him go, her heart full of something she couldn't name. I'm falling for him, she realized. The Death King, the Shadow Wolf, the man everyone fears. And I'm not afraid at all. 2 months had passed since the wedding. 2 months of nightly conversations that stretched until dawn. 2 months of Severin moving incrementally closer, first to the threshold, then to a chair just inside the door, then to the settee near the fire, while Senna sat across from him in her own chair. They never touched. That was still the rule. But the bond between them had grown strong regardless, built on words and trust and a connection that transcended the physical claiming they had never completed. "Aldrich is baffled," Severin said one evening, genuine warmth softening his features. "He's run out of explanations for why you're thriving instead of fading. Perhaps I'm simply too stubborn to fade. That is one theory." His gaze was soft despite the pale coloring. "I have another." "Oh? I think you might be magic." Senna laughed. A real laugh, unguarded and bright. She had been doing that more often lately, laughing, smiling, feeling like a person rather than a shadow. "I'm an Omega," she reminded him, "the weakest of my kind. There's nothing magical about me." "I disagree." Severin leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. "You walked into a room full of terrified women and chose the monster. You looked at a curse that killed 3 queens and decided it didn't apply to you. You took a man who had forgotten how to feel anything except cold and made him remember what warmth was like." His voice softened. "If that's not magic, I don't know what is." Senna's heart hammered against her ribs. "Tell him," a voice whispered. "Tell him what you feel." But she couldn't. To speak the words would be to risk everything: the fragile peace they had built, the careful experiment they were conducting, the hope that perhaps love didn't have to end in death. "You should get some sleep," she said instead. "The trade delegation arrives tomorrow." Severin studied her for a moment, disappointment briefly crossing his features before he masked it. "You're right," he said, rising. "Good night, Senna." "Good night, Your Majesty." He paused at the door. "Severin." "What?" "Call me Severin, please." He didn't turn around. "I want to hear my name in your voice. Just once." Her throat tightened. "Good night, Severin." She saw his shoulders relax, saw the small exhale of breath. Then he was gone, and she was alone with the dying fire and the weight of everything she hadn't said. The trade delegation brought trouble. Not in the form of difficult negotiations or unreasonable demands, but in the form of Alpha Orvin of Greymore, who had somehow secured a position as an economic advisor to the Thornwick delegation, exploiting a technicality that the king's dismissal had barred him from Valdrin's court, but not from visiting as a member of a foreign party. Senna saw him across the great hall during the welcoming feast, his eyes finding hers with predatory precision. He smiled, that smooth, dangerous smile she remembered from countless nights in Greymore. "I haven't forgotten," that smile said. "I haven't forgiven." She forced herself to look away, to focus on the meal before her, but her appetite had vanished. "You've gone pale." Severin's voice was low, meant only for her. He sat beside her at the high table, closer than protocol demanded. Over the past weeks, he had begun to find excuses to be near her, adjusting her chair, passing her dishes, leaning close to comment on the entertainments. Small intimacies that had become precious to them both. "It's nothing," she said. "Senna." The way he said her name now, soft, almost tender, made her chest ache. "Tell me." She glanced toward Orvin, who was laughing at something a merchant had said. Severin's gaze followed hers, and she felt the temperature around them drop several degrees. "Ah," he said quietly, "the Alpha from your past. He shouldn't be here. You dismissed him from court after the wedding. He came as part of the Thornwick delegation. A loophole. My dismissal applied to Valdrin's court, not to foreign visitors." Severin's jaw tightened. "My advisors are already working to close this gap, but for tonight, I cannot refuse him entry without causing a diplomatic incident. Don't confront him publicly." She touched his arm without thinking, the first time she had initiated contact. They both froze. His skin was cold through the fabric of his sleeve, but not unbearably so. Not the killing cold of their first meeting. "If you make a scene, it will make things worse." He thrives on drama, on making others seem unreasonable. Severin's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his arm. The gesture was protective, possessive. "Then I will handle him privately," he said, "after the feast." "Severin, he hurt you." The words were ice and iron. "He made you believe you were worthless. He made you prefer death to returning to him." His pale eyes blazed. "I will not let him breathe the same air as you without consequence." Something broke open in Senna's chest, something she had been holding back for weeks. "I love you," she whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them, before she could consider the danger, the implications, the possibility that speaking such things might feed the very shadow they had been starving. Severin went utterly still. "Senna," he breathed. "I know I shouldn't. I know the risk. But I can't." Her voice cracked. "I can't pretend anymore. You asked me once why I stepped forward at the choosing ceremony. I said I was desperate. And I was. But that's not the whole truth." "What is the whole truth?" "I saw you." Tears burned in her eyes. "I saw a man surrounded by fear and cold and loneliness, and something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like. I didn't step forward to escape, Severin. I stepped forward because some part of me knew that we belonged to each other." Severin's hand tightened on hers. His breath came faster, misting in the suddenly frigid air. "I love you too," he said, the words wrenched from him like a confession. "I've loved you since the night you told me about Greymoor. Since you looked at my curse and called it an experiment. Since you made me remember what it felt like to want someone close instead of pushing everyone away." Joy blazed through Senna, bright and overwhelming, and then Severin screamed. His hand spasmed around hers, then released. He doubled over, clutching his chest, and the cold that poured off him was unlike anything she had felt before. Not frost, but the absolute absence of heat. The void between stars. "Severin!" She caught him as he fell, his weight bearing them both to the floor. Around them, the great hall erupted into chaos, nobles shouting, guards rushing forward, the trade delegation scrambling away from the spreading frost that crackled across the floor like lightning. "The shadow!" Severin gasped, his face contorted with pain. It knows." "What do I do?" Senna cradled his head in her lap, heedless of the cold that was numbing her hands, her arms, spreading through her body. "Tell me what to do." "Get away from me." His eyes were wild, terrified, not for himself, but for her. "It's feeding on me, on my feelings for you. If you stay close, it will—" "I'm not leaving you. You have to." He tried to push her away, but his strength was failing. Ice crystals were forming in his hair, on his eyelashes. His lips were turning blue. "Please, Senna. Please. Don't let me kill you too." "You won't." She held him tighter even as the cold burned her skin. "You won't, because I won't let you. This curse has taken 3 women from you. It will not take a 4th. "There's no cure?" His voice was fading. "I've looked. For years. There's no cure." "Then we'll find one." She pressed her forehead to his, feeling the ice against her skin. "Together. I promise you, Severin. I will find a way." His eyes fluttered closed. "Senna," he breathed. And then he went limp in her arms. "No." She shook him, slapped his face and screamed his name, but he didn't respond. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and frost spread from his heart outward, freezing him from the inside. The king was dying. And somewhere across the hall, Senna heard Orvin laugh. They carried Severin to his chambers, which Senna entered for the first time. The room was sparse, almost monastic. A narrow bed, a single chair, no tapestries, no decorations, nothing that might be damaged by the permanent chill that clung to the king. It was the room of a man who had given up on comfort, on warmth, on life. Senna refused to leave his side. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said gently, "you must rest. The cold is affecting you as well. She looked down at her hands. They were pale, bloodless, the fingers tinged with blue. Frost clung to her hair and eyebrows. Every breath hurt. But she was not dying. Not yet. The previous queens, she said. How long did they survive after the shadow awakened? Aldrich hesitated. The first lasted 3 weeks. The second, 12 days. The third? He swallowed. Hours. And the king? How long before the shadow consumed him completely? We don't know. He's never... Aldrich stopped, understanding dawning. The shadow has never activated this strongly before. The previous queens died before it could fully manifest in him. Because they didn't love him. Senna stroked Severin's frozen cheek. They feared him. They kept their distance. But I didn't. And now the shadow is feeding on his love for me, on the strength of our bond. Your Majesty, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if the shadow is feeding on love, then love is the key. She looked up at Aldrich. Everything Severin tried before was about starving the shadow, avoiding connection, maintaining distance. But what if that was wrong? What if the shadow isn't defeated by absence but by presence? By something stronger than itself? What could be stronger than a curse that has killed every queen for 4 generations? Senna thought of her mother, who had died when she was 7, of the stories her mother had told her, the songs she had sung, songs about light and warmth, and the power of things that refused to be extinguished. Songs that had made flowers bloom in their small garden even in the depths of winter. And that sudden, mysterious fever that had taken her in a single night. So fast, so inexplicable that even as a child, Senna had sensed something was wrong about it. Your mother was a witch, Orvin had once told her, but whatever curse she carried, it died with her. What if he had been lying? I need to know the origin of this curse, she said. Where it came from, how it was cast. There must be records somewhere. The royal archives, perhaps, but they're extensive, and we don't have much time. Then we'd better start immediately. The archives were a labyrinth of dust and forgotten knowledge. Senna worked through the night, pulling down volume after volume, searching for any reference to the shadow curse. Servants brought her candles when the old ones burned out, brought her food she didn't eat, brought her blankets she didn't feel. All she felt was cold. It was seeping into her bones now, spreading from the place where the bond connected her to Severin. The shadow was reaching for her through their connection, just as it had reached for the previous queens. But Senna was still alive, still searching, still refusing to give up. Near dawn, she found it. A journal, brittle with age, written in a cramped hand that was difficult to decipher. The personal diary of Queen Lysara, Severin's great-great-grandmother, and the first queen to die of the shadow. It began when my husband's grandfather killed the healer, the journal read. A woman named Vesa, who practiced the old magic. She had done nothing wrong, had only tried to help our village survive a harsh winter. But my husband's grandfather feared magic, feared what he couldn't control. So he had her burned. Before she died, Vesa cursed our line. Your descendants will know the cold they have made me suffer, she said. They will carry winter in their hearts. And every time they dare to love, that love will kill whatever it touches. Senna's breath caught. My husband did not believe in curses. He thought the woman's words were empty spite. But I saw the change in him after our wedding, the cold that crept into his eyes, the frost that formed on his pillow while he slept, and I felt my life draining away, siphoned through our bond to feed the darkness inside him. I am dying as I write this. I have perhaps a week left. But I have been researching Vesa's lineage, hoping to find a way to break the curse. What I found instead was a possibility. Vesa had a daughter, a girl she sent away before her execution, sent to a small, forgotten pack in the eastern mountains, a pack called Greymoor. Senna's blood turned to ice. She read on, her hands trembling. The daughter carried her mother's gift, not dark magic, but light, the power to heal, to warm, to mend what is broken. If the curse can be broken at all, it will be broken by one who carries Vessa's light. I pray such a person exists. I pray they find my husband's descendants before it is too late. I pray they are stronger than the darkness. The journal fell from Senna's numb fingers. Greymoor, her pack, the place she had been born, raised, and eventually sold away from. And suddenly other memories surfaced with startling clarity. Her mother singing songs that made flowers bloom in the dead of night. Her mother's hands, always warm, always healing. The way plants seemed to grow stronger when Senna was near, even now. The burn on the kitchen maid's hand that had healed impossibly fast after Senna held it. The warmth that her servants always commented on in her wing of the castle. Like calling to like, she had said to Severin. Something in her had recognized something in him. Light recognizing shadow, the cure recognizing the curse. That was the warmth she had felt in her chest when she first stood before him, not nerves, but something far deeper. Her power awakening in the presence of the very darkness it was born to defeat. And her mother's death, that sudden, inexplicable fever that had taken her in a single night. Not illness at all, but murder. Someone silencing a light bearer before she could pass on her knowledge. Your mother was a witch, Orvin had told her once, when she was too young to understand the hatred in his voice. But don't worry. Whatever curse she carried, it died with her. You're nothing special, little Senna. Nothing at all. But what if she was? What if Orvin had known all along? What if he had killed her mother not out of fear, but to prevent Senna from discovering her own power? What if he had kept Senna small and weak and worthless because he knew that if she ever realized the truth, she would be the one thing that could threaten him? Your Majesty? Senna looked up. A guard stood in the doorway, his expression grim. Alpha Orvin is requesting an audience. He says he has information about the king's condition. Senna's jaw tightened. Does he? He says he knows how to save His Majesty, but he'll only tell you, alone. The trap was obvious, but so was the possibility that Orvin actually did know something. Something he had kept hidden for years. Something that might save Severin's life. Take me to him, she said. Orvin was waiting in a small receiving room, the very picture of concerned diplomacy. But Senna knew him too well to be fooled. Leave us, she told the guards. Your Majesty. I said leave us. They withdrew reluctantly, closing the door behind them. Senna faced the man who had tormented her for 9 years, and for the first time, she was not afraid. You know what I am, she said. Orvin's mask slipped, revealing the cruel smile beneath. I wondered when you'd figure it out. My mother was a descendant of Vessa, the healer who cursed the royal line. Clever girl. He began to circle her slowly. Your mother was indeed special. A light bearer, they called them in the old days. Women with the power to heal even the deepest wounds, to break even the strongest curses. And you killed her. I had to. His voice held no remorse. She was going to take you away, train you in the old ways. If you'd learned to use your power, you would have been dangerous, uncontrollable. So I removed her and convinced you that you were nothing. You kept me weak on purpose. I kept you useful. His eyes glinted. A light bearer makes an excellent tool, Senna. Your very presence strengthens those around you, heals them without their knowledge. Why do you think Greymoor thrived while neighboring packs struggled? Why do you think I kept you close despite your worthlessness? The revelation hit her like a blow. She had been feeding him her power for years, unknowingly sustaining him while he systematically destroyed her sense of self. You're a parasite, she whispered. I'm a survivor. He stopped circling, facing her directly. And I'm offering you a choice. Come back to Greymoor with me. Let the king die. In exchange, I'll teach you to use your power properly. You'll be valued, respected, and powerful. And if I refuse? Then I'll tell the court what you are. A descendant of the witch who cursed the royal line. The shadow that's killing their beloved king was created by your ancestor. How long do you think they'll let you live once they know? Senna stared at him. The old fear tried to rise up. The fear that had kept her silent and submissive for so long. But it couldn't take hold. Not anymore. You made a mistake, she said quietly. You spent 9 years teaching me that I was worthless, that I had nothing to lose, that death was preferable to returning to you. She stepped forward, and Orvin stepped back, alarm flashing across his features. You created someone who isn't afraid of your threats, Orvin. Someone who would rather die saving the man she loves than live another day under your control. You can't break the curse, Orvin snarled. You don't know how. Then I'll figure it out. She smiled. A cold smile, a queen's smile. I've gotten quite good at figuring things out. She turned toward the door. Guards! They burst in immediately, swords drawn. Escort Alpha Orvin to the dungeons, Senna commanded. He is under arrest for the murder of my mother and conspiracy against the crown. You have no proof, Orvin shouted as the guards seized him. I have your confession. She met his eyes. You just told me everything, Orvin. In your arrogance, you assumed I was still the frightened Omega you knew. You forgot that I am the Queen of Valdrin now. She walked out without looking back, his screams of rage echoing behind her. Severin was fading. The frost covered his entire body now, a crystalline shell that made him look like a statue. His heartbeat was barely detectable, his breathing so shallow it was nearly invisible. But Senna could still feel him through the bond. A thread of connection, thin and fraying, but present. I know what I am now, she whispered, taking his frozen hand in hers. I know what you need. She closed her eyes and reached for something she had never known existed. A warmth deep inside her, buried beneath years of suppression and self-doubt. It was faint at first, barely a flicker, but as she focused on it, fed it with every good memory she had, every moment of joy and love and hope, it began to grow. She thought of her mother's songs, of Severin's smile when he thought she wasn't looking, of the nights they had spent talking until dawn, of the moment she had stepped forward at the choosing ceremony, not from desperation alone, but from recognition, like calling to like. Now she understood. Her light had recognized his shadow. The cure had found the curse. That was why she had felt no fear when she stood before him. That was why she alone had survived where others had died. The warmth built and built, filling her chest, spreading through her limbs. Her skin began to glow with a soft golden light, the light of healing, of hope, of love, stronger than any curse. She pressed her lips to Severin's frozen mouth. Light poured from her into him, blazing through their bond like sunrise after endless night. The shadow inside him shrieked. She could feel it fighting, clawing, and trying to hold on. But it was no match for what she carried. No match for generations of light passed down from mother to daughter, waiting for this moment. The ice began to melt. First his lips, warming beneath hers, then his face, his chest, his hands. Color returned to his skin. His heartbeat strengthened, his breathing deepened. And the shadow, the darkness that had haunted his bloodline for 4 generations, dissolved like frost in sunlight, leaving nothing behind but warmth. Severin's eyes opened. Senna, he breathed. I'm here. Tears streamed down her face, but she was laughing. I'm here, and you're alive, and the curse is broken. He reached up to touch her face, and his hand was warm, warm for the first time in his entire life. How? He whispered. Love, she said simply. The curse was born from hatred and cold. It could only be broken by its opposite. Severin pulled her down to him, wrapping his arms around her with a strength that surprised them both. They lay tangled together on his narrow bed, both crying, both laughing, both alive. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I know." She pressed closer to him, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her ear. "I love you too." 6 months later. The gardens of Valdrin were in full bloom. It was the first true spring the kingdom had seen in generations. Without the shadow's influence, the eternal chill that had clung to the castle had finally released its grip. Flowers bloomed where frost had once been. Songbirds returned to trees that had stood barren for decades. And in the center of the garden, surrounded by roses, the king and queen sat together. Senna's hand rested on her swelling belly, where their child grew strong and healthy. Severin's arm was wrapped around her shoulders, his warmth a constant comfort. On her neck, fresh but healed, was the claiming bite he had given her 3 months ago, completing the bond that had formed between them long before any ritual could capture it. "The council approved the new academy yesterday," he said. "The first school for light-bearers in 400 years. They're calling it the Vesa Institute." Senna smiled. I think she would have liked that. Her curse ended up bringing about the very thing she wanted. A world where those with the old magic are taught and protected, not feared and burned. Her descendants will be honored there. Starting with you. Starting with our daughter. Senna touched her belly. Aldrich says she carries the light too. He could feel it when he examined me. Severin's hand joined hers, cradling the life they had created together. "A light-bearer princess. The nobles will be terrified." "Good. They should learn to respect what they once feared." A guard approached, bowing low. "Your Majesties, you have visitors. Your sister is here, Your Majesty, with her pups." Senna's face lit up. After Orvan's arrest, Greymoor's entire structure had crumbled, revealing secrets hidden for decades, including the existence of Callista, a half-sister Senna had never known. Another of Orvan's victims, another woman he had kept hidden and controlled. Senna had personally overseen the Pack's reorganization, ensuring that those who had suffered under Orvan's rule were protected and freed. "Send them in," Severin said. As children's laughter filled the garden, Senna leaned into her husband's warmth and closed her eyes. She thought of the choosing ceremony, where she had been the only woman brave enough, or desperate enough, to step forward. She had expected death. She had hoped for escape. Instead, she had found love, family, purpose, home. "What are you thinking about?" Severin murmured. "The beginning." She opened her eyes to smile at him. "How I walked toward you expecting nothing and found everything." He kissed her temple, his lips warm against her skin. "I was thinking the same thing." The children tumbled into the garden, shrieking with delight at the flowers and butterflies. Callista followed, her face relaxed in a way Senna had never seen at Greymoor. The guards stood at respectful distances, no longer radiating wariness around their king, but genuine loyalty. Everything had changed. Everything was warm. And as the sun set over Valdrin, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the quiet Omega who had stepped forward when no one else would lean against her king and watch their future unfold. Neither of them had expected love, but love had found them anyway.